Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Said Lama. I'm the industry account manager for the civil team. With me today, the usual suspects, Matt Colbert and Colin Godet. Also, Jay Kwan is joining us for answering questions in the background. A couple of things first. It's going to be 90 minutes. There might be some confusion on the timing, but we're going for 90 minutes. Also, this session will be recorded. I will be posting a straight link to our YouTube channel, so I'll make it easy for you. Also, reminding you about the question panel, please post your questions there. We're gonna be answering questions along the way, and also we're gonna dedicate space at the end just to answer the remaining questions. So today, very exciting today. This is one of my favorite topics. We're gonna be talking about grading. So let's begin. This is the agenda for what we have for today. It's starting with feature lines. Then we're going to talk about grading, ponds, lot grading, parking lots, and yes, at the end, Q&A. This is what we have in agenda for the coming weeks. Our next session about best practices will be styles and template creation. Just right after, we'll have a session about our productivity tools. Specifically, we're going to talk about production tools for Civil 3D. And the following weeks, we'll have productivity tools for CAD managers and for surveyors. Just a quick reminder also of our classic courses now being delivered remote, InfraWorks Fundamentals starting May 21st, and Civil 3D Fundamentals beginning June 2nd. These are some of the bundles that we have available for you, but I would like to add something else. Recently, Autodesk extended their trial until June 13th for the BIM 360 product. So this is a great opportunity to test this tool. This is a BIM-centric platform that collaborates and connects your design processes with project teams, just in just one place. And with this bundle, we get you like starting in 24 hours. So it's just a little bit of planning, training, and a little bit of setup as well. Also, Bluebeam has extended their trial up to 90 days. This is something unique. For those who don't know what Bluebeam is a PDF creation, markup, and collaboration tool. It's specific for design and construction workflows. So if you're interested in exploring Bluebeam, please reach out. I'm gonna pass my contact information at the end of this webinar. So feel free to reach out anytime. Okay, let's get to business. Matt, please, let's start talking about grading.
Okay, thank you. Let me just take control here. Where are we? Okay, here we are. So welcome to the grading webinar. My name is Matt Goldberg, as I had mentioned. I'd like to thank my good friend Tish. She's not here on the webinar, but she'll probably watch it in the YouTube. When I was doing some research and development for this webinar, she helped me out. She does grading a ton. I do grading as well, but that's just her thing. I'm gonna let you in on a little bit of a secret though. How much of a software nerd we both are. So me and her husband hung out at her place a few Saturdays ago. And so get this, all right, it's Saturday night, right? We ordered some pizza and he's got like this big 60-inch screen in his living room and we had Civil 3D up there and we were just software geeking out all night. It was ridiculous. So that's me in a nutshell.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. All right, here we go. Come on, there we are. All right, we're already off to a poll here. We haven't even talked about anything yet, and we already have a poll. So you're going to see on your screen any second a question. Let me pick one here. Question is going to be, how much of your work is focused on grading, essentially? You'll see a bunch of options. All right, so I'll launch the poll now. So I just wanted to say, roughly how much your work is spent focused on grading tools, 0 to 20%, 20 to 40, you see the options. Just curious, how much grading do you do? Give you a few seconds to finish up here. We have almost 50% of you have voted already. It's just about a tie between the second and third option. All right, 10 more seconds. Myself, when I was in production, I was probably in the 20%, 20 to 30% range as well when I was in production. All right, 2/3 of you have voted, so a few more seconds. Excellent. Okay, we're good. So I'll close the poll and I'll pop up the results for you. All right, so what you can see there is it's kind of a split between 20 to 40, 40 to 60% usage. So that tells me where you're at in terms of what your grading needs are. So I'll hide that poll. There's going to be a couple more a bit later, so thanks for that. So here's the agenda: feature lines, grading tools, ponds, some lock grading, finish off with parking lots. That's what we'll talk about today. Now, the first thing, I'm just going to get this right out of the way. Grading sort of has a bad rap with Civil 3D. If you go to the discussion group forum and you ask, which Civil 3D tool is the least stable, you're going to get an overwhelming response at grading. Now, I don't want to say that it's unstable, but if you had to pick one, it's the one with the most potential for instability. Now, there's a couple things you can do to greatly increase your chances with grading. And by the way, a lot of the bad rap from grading is from history. Back before 2010, yeah, grading was fairly unstable at times. It's improved immensely since then. And so a lot of the respondents to a question that you might ask in the discussion groups are the people who remember back then. My friend Tish, her entire job is grading, and she almost never has a problem. So what does that tell you? Well, maybe she's not using the tools the way other people use the tools, or maybe she's using them in the best practices way. Anyway, there's things that you can do to increase your chances, and these two are the top two. Simplify your feature lines. Now, what you're looking at, the dimension that says 21 meters, right? Look at the blue feature line underneath. Look how many vertices it has. I don't know how many there are. It's I don't know, 1,000 vertices and within 20 meters, and that's just way too much. We need to simplify those feature lines. Conversely, it's hard to tell underneath, but there's a tin model underneath that 21, and it's not particularly dense, but it's fairly dense. That tin model is made from contours, and the contours aren't the greatest data to create surfaces from, but think about a scanner or LiDAR. You might have survey points every few millimeters with a terrestrial scanner. That's a very, very dense tin model. You can simplify that too. The image on the bottom is how to simplify a surface using Civil 3D's tools. It's essentially decimating it, reducing the number of points in the surface. We don't need points every 2 millimeters, but I want more points than, every 50 meters. So somewhere in between 50 meters and 2 millimeters is a good balance of points. Now, I'm not going to tell you what that is because it depends on your usage case. But the simpler the feature line and the simpler the surface, the better chance you're going to have of successful grading. The more complicated each of those things are, will give you the less chance of success. You couple both of those things, a dense feature line and a dense surface, the grading is going to be slow. It's going to be unstable. So those are the two major things you can do. The third thing that I don't have listed here is data references, data shortcuts. try your hardest not to do any grading in any other file. If you got a subdivision with alignments and corridors and pipes and all sorts of other stuff, use data references. Data reference out whatever it is you need to do your grading. Have a brand new, fresh grading DWG file. Do the grading inside it, make your surfaces. Don't have anything else in there, no sections, no corridors. If you have to have alignments, fine. Data reference your existing ground surface so you can use it as a daylight, but do your grading in its own clean DWG file. So simplify the feature lines and surfaces, do your grading in a new DWG. That will give you the best chance of success with grading. Okay, editing tools. The top left image there, that's all the editing tools we have. Typically what you want to do first, I'll switch over to Civil 3D here. So you're not, it's not PowerPoint death here. Let's try, come on. There we are. Feature lines are the start of every grading scenario. In fact, a lot of grading scenarios don't even use the grading tools themselves. They don't use the criteria. Sometimes, maybe parking lots, it's just all about multiple feature lines, and there's your design. There's two sort of buckets of editing tools that we place for feature lines. And typically you want to edit the geometry first. We want to edit the plan shape of this entity. That's almost always number one. Elevations almost always come after. You know, I've got this sort of organic shape here, this blue feature line. You know, if I want to make that a different shape, right, get rid of a PI or get rid of a curve or add a new PI. All the geometry editing tools are right here. So I'm just going to do a couple really quick. Get rid of a point of intersection. Like that. Maybe I want to add a new point of intersection, such as this. Break, trim, join, right? AutoCAD has those tools, but AutoCAD doesn't know how to deal with feature lines. So you can't use the AutoCAD break, trim, and join tools. You have to use these tools. I'm not going to go over all these tools. This is a training class. This is best practices, but I will give you one hint, right? When I teach Civil 3D and when we talk about grading, I always ask my students to put a curve here, like a fillet, and then I ask them to remove it. Okay, so my goal here is to get something that looks like it used to look before the curve was added, like that. I want to get rid of the curve. And so most of my students can't figure this out. They get this far. They say, okay, edit curve. And they try a radius of 0 because that's how AutoCAD works. But that doesn't work for Civil 3D. Now, another thing I teach all my students is keep one eye on the command line at all times. And I actually mention that before I get my students to do this. And what they don't see is this. So they get the right button. They get the button to edit the curve, but they don't see that. So that delete, it's not trimming out that piece. It's just getting rid of the curve, and it makes it into a 90-degree angle, or close to 90 degrees in this case. So that's your tip of the day. That's how you get rid of a curve in a feature line. So we start with the geometric editing tools. Get it the right shape. And then once it's the right shape, then we worry about the elevation tools. And then there's lots, right? The elevation editor is this sort of vista where you can highlight any number of points and apply their elevations all at once or individually with your mouse. You can use these tools to grade the head or grade back. So if I want to hold this one vertex, I want to go at 5% in that direction, I can make that happen. By the way, this is a new tool, newish. 2018, I think this tool was released. You can associate your feature line elevations to a surface, and you can make it dynamic. Okay, right now, nothing's actually going on, but you can basically drape your feature line on a surface, but you don't have to drape it perfectly. You can have it floating above or below. It's a relative elevation. Okay, a relative elevation of 0 drapes it perfectly on your surface. But a relative elevation of 1, your feature line is hovering 1 meter above the assigned surface, and when the assigned surface is edited, your feature line is edited. So that's a newish tool. The tool I like, and the tool I usually recommend to my students, now this depends on your usage, of course, but that one right there, it's the only one with the lightning bolt in it. It's called Quick Elevation Edit. And so I'm gonna hit that, and when I get close to a vertex, you see it shows me the elevation of that vertex. Close to this vertex, it shows me the elevation, but you get towards the middle, and it shows you what the grade is. And there's an arrow there. So I am on the right half of this feature line. Well, let's say what I want to do, that's elevation 44, and I want to go down the hill here at minus 5%, right? So I make sure my cursor is on the proper side, right? The arrow is pointing to the left in this case. And then just click and type in whatever grade I want, minus 5. And so what the software does is it holds this elevation, it applies the grade that I specify, and it calculates what elevation, and it sets the elevation to that next vertex. So step number 1, adjust your geometry. Step number 2, adjust your elevations. Now, just for fun, what you're looking at are a bunch of PIs, points of intersection, the square grips. Some users get confused, what's an elevation point? And so what I'm going to do is I'll quickly run this tool. And I'll put elevation points at an increment of 5. Right, what I've done is I've just increased the density of this feature line. We have the square grips, which are the original PIs, and we have the round grips, which are the new elevation points. Now think of them as vertical PIs, because when I take this actual PI, it doesn't behave like one might expect a normal PI to behave like. Okay, these are only PIs in the vertical sense. And so that's what elevation points are. So I'm going to delete them with this tool. I want to get rid of all of them. And now we're back to having just the regular everyday PIs. And so that's sort of best practices for feature lines, because feature lines are the lifeblood of all of your grading. You can't do anything without feature lines. Edit the geometry, edit the elevations, and then you can start moving on to other grading things. If you need to use criteria, yes, but you don't always have to use criteria, right? You can make surfaces directly from feature lines, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. This one, I've created a feature line from an alignment. Now, if you watched a previous webinar, I think 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, the alignment webinar, I talked about this briefly, and I'll talk about it again because I like it. It's not always the right thing to do to create a feature line using the feature line tools. Sometimes it makes sense. Sometimes it's easier to use an alignment and a profile. And that's what I have. I've got alignment right here. I have the blue design profile right here. And I want to make a berm, and I need to use the grading tools maybe to make this berm. I need a feature line for that. So I'll quickly go feature line from alignment. There's only one. Now that alignment has 2 profiles, the existing ground and the design, so I'm going to use the design. Mid-ordinate distance will help me if I have any vertical curves, because a feature line cannot contain vertical curves. This tessellates our vertical curves. I'll choose a style. There's spiral tessellation because feature lines can't do spirals either, so they have to get tessellated. And then finally, I want it to be a dynamic link. And there we have a 3-dimensional feature line. Any change I make to the alignment and or profile, that feature line will update itself. If I choose to use criteria or a stepped offset, yeah, it's a feature line, so those things will work perfectly. If you like to use alignments and profiles instead of trying to use maybe the elevation editor to edit your feature line, use alignments and profiles. Sometimes it just makes sense. Now this one, it's called split points. Probably best that I just demonstrate this instead of talking about it. Here we have 3 feature lines, different elevations, right? The top is a 2-dimensional view, the bottom is a 3D view. The lighter color one is elevation 0, the darkest one is elevation 5, and that one's elevation 10. And currently they don't cross. Watch what happens when they cross. So I'll move the lighter colored one so that it in fact crosses both of the other ones. Keep your eyes on the bottom half of my screen. What just happened? Well, these 3 feature lines are on the same site. When you have feature lines on the same site and they cross or they touch in some way, right, endpoint to endpoint even, they must share that vertex elevation. Now you might think, well, that's not good. It is actually. It's Civil 3D's safety tip, not safety tip, but it's a safety feature. See, feature lines are there to create surfaces. Now, some users use them for other things, and that's fine. But the idea behind feature lines is they're going to be used as break lines, 3-dimensional break lines, to make surfaces. And so you can't have it where one feature line is hovering well above another one and still use them as break lines. There's differing elevations where they cross. That can't happen in a tin surface. So when you have feature lines that cross, they must share a vertex, and that's what's going on. Now, the darker blue lines lowered themselves to match the lighter blue line, because that's the lighter blue line is the last one that was edited. Watch what happens. I'm going to move this one just a little bit to the right. Notice the shared vertex now is up at elevation 10. So, well, why did that happen? Well, guess what? The last feature line that you edit is the one that wins, right? There has to be a decision. Civil 3D needs to decide which of the 2 elevations to use where they cross. And so it decides by whichever one was edited last. Now that may or may not work for you, but there's a way that not everybody knows to force one or the other to be the controlling entity. So my plan here, I would like to force this one to be the controlling entity of all 3. And you can do that with styles. So first I'm going to assign styles to this. Now, you know what? Before I do that, I'm going to show you where this can actually be used. At the bottom right image, this is a corridor on the right side. The big, thick blue lines from the corridor, those are corridor feature lines extracted to be dynamic feature lines. The magenta rectangle is a building pad. So that's where the home goes, of course. The red, which I'll circle in blue here, those 2 red feature lines, it's a driveway. Now, quite often, that building pad needs to stay at some elevation. And also, quite often, the corridor is modified and its elevations move up or down. So the red driveway sort of needs to float in between. And so if because they're feature lines and the last one that was edited wins, you're not always guaranteed that the driveway would be sort of this floating entity between them. So this is where you need to use the split point resolution feature I'm about to show you. It's all about styles. Well, that's half about styles, and the other half is it's like a hierarchy. So let me set the styles first. I'm going to set that to style 1. All right, already good things have happened. You can see down here, the red thing is actually controlling. All right, I'll take this one and I'll make it style 2. Finally, oops, what did I just do? All right, let's try that again. I think I accidentally dragged it somewhere. All right, let's make this style 3. All right, there we are. So what just happened? How did I use styles to affect how this works? All right, so what I'll do now is just to prove to you this is actually going on, I'll move this one. Last time I moved one of these, the red feature line adjusted. And I'll move this one too. Last time I moved this, the red feature line adjusted. Now it's not. The red feature line is the controlling one now. I'm moving these other ones all I want, but the red one is still now the controlling one. Different behavior than what you saw 2 minutes ago. How did that happen? With my site, I go to feature lines collection, I go to properties. And there's options here. This is your feature line style hierarchy. It's for split point resolution. Okay, any feature line that's using style that's on the top of this list will be the controlling feature line. And then the second one and then the third one. So whichever feature lines control is completely controlled by this hierarchy. So that's a feature that not a lot of my customers know and fewer of them use. But when you're doing a subdivision with your driveways, the driveways would be at level 3. The corridor and the building pad would probably be at level 1. So they always control. And that is split point resolution. All right, grading. This one really, I want to talk about the criteria. So let me close some of my drawings. While I'm closing the drawings, there's really only 4 different ways to grade in Civil 3D. 4 different targets. You can grade to a surface. That's target number 1. You can grade to a known elevation. That's number 2. You can grade to a relative elevation. That's number 3. And then number 4 is you can grade for a width or a distance. That's it. There's only 4 ways to grade in Civil 3D. Now, we do have the option to create multiple criteria. These grading options are criteria. There's 4 different criteria. You can create a number of criteria that you want, but you might say, well, would I want to create more than 4? Because there's only 4 criteria. Why do I need more than 4? It depends on what options you want to give the user. So I'm going to grade both of these things in a similar way, but I'm going to use 2 different tools. Excuse me. All right, grading surface. All right, I'm going to grade to surface. There you go. I'll pick this left one first and watch the command line. It's going to ask me a bunch of questions. Select the side, entire length. What's the format? Is it grade or slope? What is the cut slope? And what's the format for fill, grade or slope? And then what's the fill slope? So it asked me a bunch of questions to get that done. And that's fine. It didn't take very long. The other option, let's say I'll use one that's called ditch 4 slope or 5:1 to surface. I'll use this one. And I'll grade this other side. And that's it, it's done. It did not ask me those questions. And really, that's the difference between having just the 4 basic criteria, where you get the software to ask the user all of the questions. You can create a criteria where it doesn't ask them anything. You, as the Civil 3D template creator, let's say, can create something even like this. You just give it a name. Me as the designer, I don't have to know what slope to use. This is our standard ditch 4 slope. I don't care that it's 3:1 or 5:1. This is our standard. Just do it. I don't need to answer the question. And so that's your choice. When you create your Civil 3D template, do you want the user to be prompted for those questions or not? Do you want to create some grading that's named appropriately where they don't even have to know what the values are? That's up to you. How do we get to this? Well, when you create the criteria, it's just a matter of locking whichever options you wish. Now, is this best practice? I'm not going to say yes or no. It's about your choice. Personally, every grading scenario is pretty different, and so in my drawings, I just have the 4 criteria. I want to be prompted for all these options. But for my friend Tish, she's got a certain scenario where she does over and over and over again, and she doesn't want to be prompted for those questions because it takes too much time. And so for her, she's locked a lot of these things. So it's not best practice. It's about what's best for you in that case. All right, another grading option that's really quite useful. You don't always have to use grading criteria, like I said earlier. Sometimes it's just a bunch of feature lines that are added to a surface. But you've got options on how you want to add those to a surface. So let me open this infill file. You've probably heard of the infill tool. When you do some grading like this, you start at the red feature line, you grade to the outside to the surface, then you end up with a hole that you have to fill using the infill tool. Most people understand how that works. There's other ways to use the infill tool as well while my drawing is booting up. These two on the left are very similar. This one, I have 2 feature lines. I right-click them and I chose Add to Surface as Break Line. This one I didn't. All I did with the bottom one is I used the infill tool. Let me show you that. All right, here we go. All right, I think, what is it, 10:35 now? Just before I demonstrate this, I'm gonna get Colin or Jay to unmute your mics and let me know if there's any cool, 1 or 2 cool questions you want the rest of the group to know.
We haven't gotten anything specifically grading related. One question on kind of the best sub-assemblies to use with ditches, but we'll stay focused on the grading stuff
Okay.
for today.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Yep.
All right, so 2 ways I can add the red and the blue feature lines to a new surface. So one way is I'll just pick these 2. And I've already applied appropriate elevations to them. And so I'll right click and I'll say Add to Surface as Break Line. And I'll pick one. That would be the blue. It's a standard break line because they're 3D. And there we are. I now have a surface made from those 2 feature lines. Now I do have to assign a boundary because you can see the triangulation going outside. I'm not going to do that because I'll just move on to the red. But when you add break lines to a surface that way, you will typically have a boundary issue. Is that a problem? Not really. But here, I'm going to do this a different way. Now, I need to set my site properly. And I'm not actually going to use the criteria because, well, I've already got my design done. I've got 2 feature lines that I want to add to a surface. All I need to do at this point is use the infill tool. Twice. There's once and then twice. So I've made another surface using what is essentially the same feature lines, but all I did was use the infill tool. Notice I don't have a boundary problem anymore. That's the biggest difference with making surfaces from break lines like I did on the left, or making surfaces using the infill tool. Now, the infill tool is useful when you have closed regions. You have areas that are enclosed completely by 1 or 2 or 1 or more than 1 feature lines. It doesn't even have to be a closed feature line. I could have 3 feature lines, 1, 2, 3, I can use the infill tool right there. So it doesn't have to be a single feature line that's closed. Any closed area that is encompassed by any number of feature lines. Is one better than the other necessarily? Well, I don't know. I don't have to deal with a boundary here. Other than that, the tin lines are very similar. So really it's just a boundary problem. Should you use it? That's up to you. I like to use the infill tool. I'm going to show you some more options later. In fact, right here. This one, I have a surface and an infill tool, right? There's the green feature line around the outside. There's already an infill tool there. These two red feature lines are currently not on the same site. I do need to figure out what site those things are on. North, okay. The red feature lines, I'll select them both. They are on the none site currently. The elevations of them has been applied appropriately, and all I need to do is move them to the north site. And because there's already an infill object right inside here, those new red feature lines will become part of my surface automatically, just by moving them to a site. Now I do have to rebuild the surface. There. So simply by adding feature lines within an infill, they automatically become part of the surface, part of the grading group. Now I do need to add another couple of infills in here to finish it off, but that's essentially how the infill tool works. Later on, we'll talk about some parking lot tools where this is actually going to be quite useful. So to wrap up this section, infill, whenever you have a region that's enclosed completely by one or more feature lines. And when you already have an infill, any new feature lines will become part of that surface as long as you rebuild that surface. All right, this brings me to my next poll. Question is, when you add feature lines to a surface, do you think you could make use of this infill tool maybe instead of add to surfaces break line, or if you already use it? I'm curious, do you use this infill all the time? Sometimes, not at all? Now, the results for this poll might be a little misleading because maybe you don't do grading. And so you're going to say not at all, possibly. All right, we've got about 1/3 of people have voted so far. I'll give you a few more seconds. I will give you a bit of advice while we're waiting. As you use the infill tool and as you add break lines, occasionally you're going to see that the place where you've added that infill tool just sort of goes away and you have to re-add it. I've seen that before. It's not particularly uncommon. As you're making changes to your grading scenario, sometimes the infills just go away. And so you have to be a little studious. You got to make sure you look for that little diamond that indicates the infill tool is there, right? In the bottom left image, oh, you can't see it. But keep that in mind. There are some editing tools that will, for whatever reason, get rid of that infill diamond. Make sure you just re-add it. How can you tell? Just look at your surface in the object viewer. When you see an area that isn't shaded, you know that you need an infill tool there. Okay, so if that's been enough time, I will close the poll. I will share it for you. So we see 60% use the infill tool a little bit, 30% use it all the time. Thank you, that's awesome. And 10% not at all. Again, if you don't do grading, well, you're going to say not at all. All right, I'll hide that one and let's continue. Slope transitions. In this scenario, I made this berm with, let's say, 2-to-1 slope both sides for the entire length of the feature line, right? When you perform grading, the command line, one question is, do you want to apply this to the entire length? You've probably seen that if you've done any kind of grading. You'd probably say yes. And maybe yes is the right answer today, but maybe tomorrow there's something that we didn't see here, and you need to create a retaining wall or something, some other kind of slope. Right? This is absolutely possible. You do not have to delete this grading and start over, although sometimes it makes sense to do so. You can definitely create a slope transition after the fact. So that's what we had. That's what we want. Now the image at the bottom, very typical. Okay, when you do slope transitions, the contours in the area of the transition almost always look funky like this. But that can be fixed simply by deleting some extra tin points within there. That's all I did. So yes, sometimes the contours are funky, but they can be fixed by manually adjusting your surface tin model. All right, how do we make that happen? It's about creating transition regions. Because I have a single grading object that is, let's say, 2-to-1 for the entire length, what I need to add is 4 regions. One region where it stops becoming 2-to-1, one region where it starts becoming 1-to-1, another region where it stops becoming 1-to-1, and another region where it goes back to 2-to-1. Basically, at these circles, you're going to see 4 different transition regions. Okay, so let's see if I can make this happen. So the tool is right here, create a transition. And you can use this within an existing grading object. So which feature line do I want to create a transition for? It's that one. And then where's my start point? I'm going to pick the center of this circle. And it's going to ask me some questions. I'm just going to keep it 3-to-1 for now. And I'm still in the create transition tool. So I'll continue and add all 4 of my transitions. So I'll try to go through this really quickly. There's the second region. You see the thick magenta feature line that showed up? That shows me the transition region. Yours may not when you do this, because I've set up a style that shows it as thick and magenta. Right? So if you like the look of mine, you're going to have to modify your grading styles to suit. So I created the 4 transition regions, but I didn't change the slopes yet. That's easily done with that tool, edit grading. And I'm going to edit the grading in between these 2 magenta lines. So my slope is 0.1-to-1, which is essentially a retaining wall. And there we are. 3-to-1 over here and here, 0.1-to-1 here, and then the transition grading between them. Now, last thing is, well, what if this transition is too far? I want them to be a little closer together. No problem. I'll grab this magenta thick line. There's a grip right at the end of it, which might be hard for you to see, but it's there. And I can use that grip and drag that region to wherever I want it to be. Now, I see a problem with my tin, so that's going to be me sort of making edits to the tin to fix that. But that's how you can use transition regions. Would it have been easier just to get rid of this and do 3 or 4 more new grading objects? Probably not. But you know what? If that's what you're more comfortable with, that's fantastic. How's our time? Swimmingly. Okay, here's your tip, a couple of tips of the day. Here's the scenario. I've got a flat top, let's say building pad. Right. This right here is all elevation, I don't know, 38, 40, whatever the elevation is. And we're sloping, up or down to a surface or something else. That is a contour, as is this. Thing is, this is all elevation 38. So Civil 3D is having trouble figuring out, because it's all elevation 38 or 40 or some known elevation, where does it draw the contour? Now, you and I know that it should draw it exactly on the outside, but the software doesn't always know. Because it's all elevation 38, where does it draw the 38 elevation? All right, so I'll open that drawing and I will tell you how to fix it. Now, it is a workaround. Elevation 38 or 40 or whatever the number is, it's not going to be elevation 40 anymore. It's going to be elevation 40.0001 or 001, depending on the precision of your labels. Long and short of it is, I can't make it exactly 40. I think that's my elevation here. Let me just double check. Yeah, so elevation 40, contours are going all over the place. I need to make it a different elevation. So quickly, I will edit my side slope grading because it grades from a red feature line up to elevation 40, but I'm going to make it 40.001. As long as my spot elevations aren't to the millimeter, it's just going to show as 40.0. So while true, it isn't exactly 40. When I'm done, there's no more rogue contours. Right? The 40 contour is right there. Now I do have a tiniest gap in here. Is that going to affect anything? No. 1 millimeter, it's not going to affect my volumes. In this case, if it was 47 hectares, maybe it would, and maybe I'd have to go to the 10th of a millimeter. If I had spot elevations to the millimeter, I would have to round those down somehow, or I'd have to go to the 10th of a millimeter here too. But that's your choice. That, if I want to get rid of those contours, I do need to make this 40 point just a bit higher, or lower if you're grading down to this elevation. Here's a scenario, another scenario where it's not doing exactly what we want. Now, it might not be obvious to you. We have a red feature line here that's all one elevation. This red feature line is higher, right? You can see the contours going up to it, and so that makes sense. But look at the tin model. It's going back and forth between the 40 meter feature line. And when in actuality, what I want to have happen, I want this to be a nice even slope. This is a high point right here. I want the contours to go from that high point down to there. What you need to do is you need to have a brand new feature line that connects this feature line along your intended path down to this feature line. I need a brand new feature line. What does this do? Really, it forces the surface, it forces the contours to do what we want. So, brand new feature line. Contour test, I think. Good. Now I'm going to start at that center line, center of the circle. Now, the elevation of that feature line is 42.5, so I'll accept that. Next point. Well, the next center of the circle. What's the elevation there? I have no idea. So I'm going to use the transition option. In fact, I'll use the transition option all the way until I get to this circle where I know the actual elevation. So I'll T for transition because I don't know the elevation yet. Next, center of this circle. Elevation, no idea, transition. Center of this circle, transition. Center of that circle, transition. And then finally, center of this circle, now I do know the elevation, is 44. Enter. So it's creating the new feature line with the elevations transitioning from one elevation to the next. And because it's going on the same site, it will affect the surface. Now I just need to make sure, do I need to rebuild the surface, or maybe I added it to the wrong site? Let's find out. Oh, maybe I added it to the wrong site. Of course I did. Wrong site, no problem. I'll just grab it. Move to site. Cross your fingers. Rebuild that surface. There we are. Okay. So now you can see the contours are in fact following that red brand new feature line exactly the way I wanted it. And so to sum up, sometimes you need to sort of create this transition feature line to get the surface to drain in the direction you want. You probably noticed so far that the topics today, it's almost more of tips and tricks and some best practices. Now, as we're developing the agenda for this class, we're just coming up with some ideas, and there are some best practices with grading. To get the most success, it's really just about using it properly and for your intended design, right? Because grading scenarios are so different. It's hard to just show exact best practices for everything. So we sort of turned this into a lot of tips and tricks, and so that's definitely one of them. Okay, this section's on ponds. We're going to start with grading a feature line at 0%. So the deal here is we've started with a feature line on the outside, and we're using the grading tools to grade to the inside at a certain distance at a grade of 0%. Civil 3D hates grading at 0%. How do we know this? Well, I know it because I've done it a lot. How do we know that something bad has happened? Well, that is what a corner should look like. Quite often, you'll actually see a single sort of mitered line at the corner. But definitely, when you see something like that, these two feature lines are crossing one another. I got all sorts of colors going on here. Feature lines are crossing each other. That is bad. If you do not stop this in its tracks, you're going to have problems with grading later. So let me close my drawings here. So what do you do? We need to grade, let's say for a certain distance at 0%, and then we run into that problem. What do we do? There's a couple of options. You can certainly grade at, instead of 0%, maybe 0.1% or 0.001%. That's an option. If you're only grading 2 or 3 meters wide, 0.1% is not really going to make a noticeable difference in anything, including elevations. But if you have to grade 30 or 40 meters wide at 0%, then it definitely could be a problem. There's another option to grade, right? When you grade, you're specifying grade or slope, right? Grade is 0% for flat. Well, what's the slope for 0%? Most people say, you know, I'm not sure. Well, think about it. That is 1-to-1, right? 45 degrees. That's 2-to-1. That's 10-to-1. That's 1,000-to-1. So what is flat? 1,000,000-to-1? Well, it's still not perfectly flat, right? Basically, there's nothing in Civil 3D where you can type a number to slope flat. But there is a trick. So in this case, I've graded at a 0% grade, and it's giving me a problem. So one thing that you can try is using a slope. But Matt, you said you can't use, there's no number that will slope flat. Well, what we do is I specify slope. You'll see in a minute. Let's see, distance 10, slope. Check it out. You can actually type the word horizontal. So this is actually better than the other one, right? Check it out. I've got the mitered corners. Those are awesome, but not there. So it's still not perfect. So 0% was bad. Horizontal slope was better. Now, ask me why. I have no idea. Why is 0% worse than a horizontal slope? Don't know. But in this case, it's still not working. What do we do? I can't have anything cross itself. That's bad. So my last resort in this case is really just to use the stepped offset tool. Because I know that it's a 10-meter offset. I know the elevation difference is 0. So I can just use the stepped offset. Offset 10, side to offset. Elevation difference is 0. But of course, there's no grading object inside there. There's no surface. So now what? Well, that's when we can use our infill tool. Because we have an area enclosed by multiple feature lines. There. It's hard for you to see, but right there is my infill. And when I go to make a surface, that will be part of the surface. So when you're grading flat, try it. Grade at 0%. If that doesn't work, try 0.01. If that doesn't work, try horizontal slope. If that doesn't work, use the stepped offset. Now, I think I have another poll. Okay, last poll of the day. What is your success rate of grading at 0%? And this poll should accommodate everybody because there's an option that says I don't grade at 0%. So what is your success rate? When you grade at 0%, does it work? Do you get the funky feature lines that cross each other? Wow. So far, I'm a little bit surprised. We've got almost half the people who voted, and a lot of them said, I don't grade at 0%. A lot of them are 100%. Oh, we're getting more people. You know what? If I could call horse races, I'd do that voice, but I'm not even going to try. Definitely when you're grading, while we're waiting for the poll to finish, whenever I grade at 0%, I know that this is a potential issue, and I look at every single corner. I make sure that I have that single mitered line, and I make sure that I don't have any of the lines crossing one another, and if it's good, then I'll continue. If it's bad, I got to figure something else out. All right, got about 2/3 voted. I'll close the poll, and I will display it for you so you can see the results. And you will see half the people don't grade at 0%. 17% are successful about 1/3 of the time, and about 30% are successful most of the time. So that's good. That's about what I would expect it. All right, we'll hide that poll. Now it's 11 my time, of course. Colin, any interesting questions so far?
We do have a good one.
Awesome.
Talking about your flat area example, could we just add a point at the top of the surface, kind of somewhere in the middle at 40.001? Would that fix the contour issues that we were looking at there?
Yep. So what I'll do is, could I keep that drawing open? I didn't. So let's say this is elevation 40, like my other one. What I did is I graded 40.001, and the question was, can I just add a point here? That's that 40.001. Yeah, totally could. Yep. There's always multiple ways to skin that cat. Now the shape of this, the flat area, you may have to add more than one point. Like for me, with this scenario, I couldn't just add this one point because, well, where are these tin lines going to go? So what I'd have to do is I'd have to maybe in this scenario, I'd add a point here. I'd probably add one here and then maybe here. And so you may get away with adding one point in the middle if you have a roughly circular or rectangular. But if you got a funky shape, you may have to add more than one point. But yes, thank you. Who was that, by the way?
That was Len.
Right on. Good job, Len. Yep, you could totally add points. One more?
Actually, we don't have too many other questions at all.
Okay, awesome, good. They're just riveted, right? Thanks. Thanks, Colin. All right, let's move on. Detention pond with a sloped bottom. So the deal is, there's our pond. Most of it's pretty simple. We have a grading object that goes down at, I don't know, let's say 7 to 1, right there. Then it goes flat. It's hard to see here, but right there, it goes flat for a ways, and then it goes down at 2 to 1, and that's all fine, but this is not flat. It doesn't go down at 2 to 1 to some known elevation like 34. We need to make sure that the water drains, in this case, to the north. So this bottom of our pond has to be sloped, as mentioned here, or as indicated there, that is. I like to call this use of an interim surface. At the left image here, I've graded my flat area. I'm about to grade to this bottom of this sort of sloped pond. So what I did was I created this surface, which is essentially a 1% slope in this direction. How did I make that surface? Well, I did this first. That's just a feature line at some elevation, right? I have an elevation in mind, right? The bottom of my pond at this end has to be, let's call it 34.5. So that feature line is elevation 34.5. I graded to the north at -1% and to the south at +1%. So right here is 34.5, but then it goes up at 1%. And I don't really care what the elevation is up here. I want to know that it goes up 1%. So any drainage will go down from here down towards 34.5. So I have this flat plane at 1%, and it's a surface now, and it's a surface I can grade to. I'm going to zoom in here. So from this feature line that goes around the pond at this level, I'm grading to my interim surface, which happens to be 1% that way. Now, there's a couple of tricks to make this happen. We have feature lines crossing one another, and we talked about split points earlier today. When you have feature lines in the same site, they need to occupy the same elevation where they cross. And so I can't have that here. So that feature line has to be on its own site. Name it whatever you like. I called mine Interim, or maybe you call it Pond Bottom. That's your site name. I have 2 grading objects. Grading from that, just grade to some arbitrary distance. That distance there, that distance here, -1 to the north, +1% to the south. Turned on that surface. Again, I called it Pond Bottom Surface. So essentially, I'm creating a surface that represents the bottom of the pond. And then I'm grading to it. And that's essentially how you manage that. You have to have 2 different sites, because if you don't have 2 different sites, the feature lines will interact with each other, which is not what we want. And now you have a surface that you can grade to. So I don't really need to open the drawing for that one, just because it's really just an idea in this case. You can use this for parking lots too, let's say. Maybe you've got a parking lot that's a funky shape, which I'll show a bit later. I can create think of it as a flat plane. I would like all of my drainage to, let's say, come down here. So I'm going to design this flat plane so that that happens. And then when I do my parking lot, I just start adding feature lines, and good things happen. So you can make use of this interim surface, not just for ponds, but for parking lots and then lots of other potential scenarios as well. Lot grading. All right, let me open a drawing for us. So the lot grading scenario, I've got a bunch of parcels set up. I have a corridor here as well. The best way to describe this technique is that we have what are essentially 2 fixed design areas here, right? The corridor is its own entity. It's being controlled by alignment and profile and assembly. It is what it is. It's not really part of the lot grading. I mean, it is, because where the corridor stops is the right-of-way edge, and that's where lot grading typically begins. But we can use the corridor to sort of initiate our lot grading. And the way you do that is you extract feature lines from the corridor. Right? If this is my right side of the corridor and this is my property line, right there corresponds to the outside edge of your corridor, and that's a corridor feature line. But you can't use corridor feature lines as grading entities unless you extract them first. So I'm going to show you how to extract that. So we're going to have a corridor with an extracted feature line, which can be used for grading. So that really just takes care of your property line right-of-way edge, where your properties meet the corridor. That's all handled by the corridor itself. But then what about out here? Well, that's essentially where we meet existing ground. So what I would do is I would draw a feature line all the way around at the exact point where I need to tie into the existing ground, and I will drape that feature line over the surface using the grading tools accordingly. And so that's another fixed feature, right? The corridor is one fixed feature. This feature line around the entire site, that's another fixed feature. Those are easy, right? Corridor, I mean, it's not easy, but corridors are what they are. You design your corridor as necessary. And this is our tie-in point. So I'll just drape this over the feature. And so what's left for lot grading? Because that's fixed and the corridor is fixed. What's left? Well, what's left is what happens between. What are the elevations of these things? Now that's where it starts becoming more involved. There's lots of different things that can happen to your lots, right? So for example, if this is our property, here's our corridor, and here's our other side of the property. Maybe this is our existing ground. And so maybe we would just want to do this. It's a nice, perfect slope. Well, yeah, in a perfect world, yes, but maybe we need to go up for a ways and then down at a steeper slope. So that part because every lot grading scenario is different, and in fact, within the same subdivision, very, very often, each lot, you sort of have to look at each lot as its own individual entity, figure out how to grade each lot. So I'm not going to talk about that, but I will talk about dealing with these fixed entities, right? We've got this corridor and our outer feature line. So as I mentioned, for the corridor, we need to extract the corridor feature line. Let me zoom in here. You'll see that they're red. They're inside the corridor already. They have not yet been extracted. Now the tool, once I select the corridor, is over in the ribbon. It's called, where is it? There it is. Come on, tooltip. Anyway, that's the button. For whatever reason, it's not showing me the tooltip. It's called Feature Lines from Corridor. There it is. So I'm just going to start with the outside. Now, when I hover on this feature line, that tooltip tells me the name of the feature line. Now, I called it PL just because it makes sense to me. You might see a feature line named hinge or back to sidewalk or whatever, but anyways, that's the one I want. Now, when you extract corridor feature lines, they will become dynamic only if you ask it to. So I need to go to settings. I need to make sure that the dynamic link is created. Do I want to apply smoothing? Not really. I want this feature line to be the same as the corridor. Do I want to name it? It's up to you. What code set style am I going to use? That doesn't really matter too much, but the dynamic link does. I have some choice on styles and layers and sites. So, probably I put this on the appropriate lot grading site. And then if your corridor has multiple regions, this is a reasonably new tool. See, if you tried this 5 years ago, you'd have to do it a bunch of times, once for each region. But Autodesk added this tool recently. If you have multiple regions, it's going to attempt to join all your feature lines into one, which is great. Extract. Now we have a thicker blue feature line, and its object type is Auto Corridor Feature Line. Now I've got a big thick polyline around my site. Now I'm just going to turn that into a feature line as well. From objects. Same site, same style, assign elevations. I would like to drape you onto my existing ground surface, making sure that I insert intermediate grade breakpoints so it drapes perfectly. Do I want it to be dynamically related to that surface? Not necessarily. All right, now I have two feature lines that are at the proper elevation. That one's draped on the ground. This one has been extracted from the corridor. All I need to do now is sort of figure out what to do along here. But right now I don't have a surface. I want a surface. I've got a grading group here created called lot grading. And because I have two closed feature lines, I can use the infill tool. I'm just going to do the outside. I'm not going to bother with the inside right now. There we are. Now this surface is just a straight line between the corridor and the feature line representing the outside of my site. The triangulation here is not very good. So I would then sort of force the triangles to do what I want. Other than that, it's reasonably normal contours. And so if I wanted to create maybe a 2% grade going up and then down, I just start making feature lines along my parcel segments. Or here's another option. Maybe I want 2% all the way around for 10 meters. I've got some options. Maybe one of those options is just the stepped offset tool. So I'll start with this auto corridor feature line, and I will attempt to use the stepped offset tool. And you might say, hey, it's disabled, right? I suppose because it's dynamically linked to the corridor, that tool is not available. Well, it's not available here. See, I love to select my objects in Civil 3D and use the contextual ribbon state, but that's not going to work for me. But I know that when I go modify feature line, I can get straight to the stepped offset tool here. And for whatever reason, I can now pick that. I'm gonna go 15 meters. I can pick that auto corridor feature line this way. So even though it doesn't work with the contextual ribbon, I can force it to work this way. Side offset, elevation difference, I don't know. Grade, 2%. All right. And guess what? Because I use the infill tool, that thing is now part of my surface. You can see the contours are exactly 2% from the back of the corridor to this newly offsetted line. And so from that, same deal, wherever your lot lines are, if you need something special to happen there, that's what you can do. So there's some options you can use to start your lot grading, right? Extracted corridor feature line, a draped feature line over your surface, an infill tool, and then in my case, just a stepped offset for my 2% grade all the way around. But so we're clearly not finished, but that's a very good start. Okay, finishing up, parking lot. All right, let's open this guy up real quick. So I'm gonna open the drawing that's actually complete, and I'll talk about what I did to make this happen. The data set I use for this is actually just down the street from my house. There's a park with a really small parking lot. I'm like, it's sort of flattish. I thought it'd be a good example to use. So what I did was I went into InfraWorks and used the model builder to get me the existing ground surface and the orthophoto. And then I just sort of traced some of the objects, and this is what I had. So here is how I tackled this scenario. Not too many steps, so let's just go through them. Step number one, this big, thick red feature line. I drew that around my site because that is sort of the limit of my parking lot. Right here, it had to tie into that area, into the surface in that area. So what elevations did I use? Well, surface, right? There's 3 or 4 points there. I just applied the surface elevation. Same thing here. Those are my 2 tie-in points. But what about the rest? Well, when I was looking at the existing ground surface, I saw that the surface sort of sloped in this direction. And if you remember how I accomplished the sloped pond bottom earlier, I created what I called an interim surface. That's exactly what I did here. That right there is an interim surface in a different site at 2%, 2.4% actually, from the northeast to the southwest, 2.4%. That is my parking lot plane. So I draped the red feature line over that 2.4% plane, and it was exactly 2.4% except in these 2 tie-in areas where I applied the surface elevation. Then from there I graded to the outside to give me my daylight line. So now we have something that's exactly 2.4% going from northeast to southwest. And now really all it is I got to figure out what I want to do inside the parking lot. Now what I'm going to do, just so you can see something happen, I'm going to move these to the other site so you can see what happened before. I think I had one too many things picked. All right, move to site. Now I'll put those on the none site so you can see what things look like before. Need to rebuild my surface. All right, there we go. So you can see the contours are all perfectly parallel. That's my 2.4%, which essentially followed that plane. And so what I did from there was I created these 3 yellow feature lines, because that's where I want something to happen in my parking lot, my drive aisles, where I want the water to flow. So I created those in a none site. And at first I draped them over the parking lot plane. So when I added them to this site, the contours didn't actually change. But then to promote drainage, I wanted half of the drainage from this parking lot to go here and the other half to go down there. So what I did was then I sort of lowered each of them by, I don't know, 2%, let's say. That one I lowered by 2%, that one I lowered by 2%. So I now have feature lines at appropriate elevations. And then when you finish everything up and you go add them to the parking lot site, good things happen. All right, add them to the site. And again, because there's an infill tool in there, they instantly become part of the site once I rebuild the surface. Now you probably notice my surface is set to rebuild automatically. Yeah, it is, but for whatever reason, I do need to force the surface to rebuild. Now, the magenta lines that you see, that's my water drop tool. So I added a couple of drops here. I wanted to see if I designed this thing correctly, and sure enough, wherever I drop the water, it drains into here. That's my driving aisle. Water drains, goes north, and then it follows the curb and it goes out. On the south side, there's 1, 2, 3 water drops, and they also drain. Now, you'll notice that it drains over the red line because I didn't add the curb yet. So right now, the red line is just edge of pavement, and it drains off. Normally, I would grade a whole curb there as well. One other thing you might notice right here is a low point. What do? Well, it depends. Do I want to create a catch basin here and then a storm sewer that goes out into the road? Or do I in fact want to just drain the water this way? Or maybe, oops, because putting a catch basin in a pipe is going to be more expensive than just putting a little channel of curb right here too. That's another option. But doing it this way and using the water drop tool shows me where the low points are. And so maybe the water comes out here and there's another catch basin that's already there. So where you go from here is up to you. And so to recap this one, what did I do? I have this 2.4% plane over which I draped all these feature lines, assigned surface elevations where necessary, graded to the surface on the outside, and then adjusted my drive aisles accordingly, up or down, depending on what I needed to do. With the use of an infill tool, makes parking lot design not easy, but definitely easier than not. And so what did we cover today? We started with feature line editing tools. Geometry first, elevations next. Then we talked about grading criteria. Do you want to just stick with the 4, or do you want to have some preset values? talked about tips and tricks for ponds, lock grading, and we just saw parking lots. So that's what we talked about today. It is 11:28. We'll go to the question and answer panel with Colin one more time.
We do have one more good question here
Okay, great.
from Karen, asking if the stepped offset command for feature lines can dynamically link to auto corridor feature lines.
No, the only way you would do that, the stepped offset creates a whole new feature line that is not in any way dynamically connected. You could use the grading tools. Instead of using stepped offset, just use a grading tool that went up 2% for 10 meters. And that would be dynamically linked with the corridor extracted feature line. But the stepped offset tool, no.
Awesome. Yeah, I accidentally sent that privately to her, but I thought it was a good question. And Saeed is actually going to follow up with CTC software as well in his closing remarks here, talking about some of the awesome auto grader stuff that's going to be released very soon.
Perfect
and that might
segue.
be a good segue to let him take it away.
I see he's already taking control. So thanks, Colin. I'll let Saeed finish up.
Yeah, I just want to wrap it up. This amazing presentation. Thank you, Matt, for showing us that much content and that valuable tips. But I'd like to wrap it up with our auto grader tool. We're gonna be launching this tool next month. It's gonna be part of our Sim project suite, which is a set of tools specifically for Civil 3D. So basically, this tool will allow you to create site grading models that are dynamic and stable at the same time by linking feature lines. So you'll be able to define parent feature lines through native methods, then create grading families to both generate and update child feature lines. So these parent lines can be anything, but might include gutter lines, pond tops, or right-of-the-way lines in subdivisions. So when this parent line changes, the product will refresh grading families to automatically update the other child line. So break lines are automatically added to the surfaces. So stay tuned. I'm gonna copy a video of a small demo about this tool. So if you're interested, please watch it and reach out if you have questions or you wanna inquire about this new feature that we're gonna be launching. Finally, I'd like to remind everybody to register for our upcoming events. If you haven't done it yet, please go to the chat section. There's a link to our events and click register. It's as simple as that. And thank you everybody for stay with us this 1 hour and a half today. And I hope to see you next week with styles and template creation.
Cool. Thanks everybody for joining. Matt Colberg signing out with Saeed and Colin.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you.